Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to do the water pump in this 93 Mustang. I started taking the car apart to deal with a balancer that was obviously bad. And when I took the fan off, I realized that the little ticky-tick sound that I could hear that was definitely an accessory because it went away when I took the drive belt off, the serpentine belt off, was a water pump. The water pump has a lot of play in it. It's obviously done, complete piece of junk. It's got to come out. So the first thing we're going to do is get the coolant out of this car. We've already got the fan shroud and fan stuff off because we did the balancer. So that's out of the way. Now's the time to do the water pump. One of the big question marks on a project like this is when we take the water pump out, do we snap off bolts in the block? So wish me luck. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but up here on the radiator is a petcock. This is to allow you to drain the radiator. It probably doesn't hurt to have a length of hose on here, especially if we're trying to save the coolant and not make too big of a mess. Kind of get that in our bucket, and then almost always when you go to do these, you'll need pliers to get a little leverage. And they're going to turn in. So you see that? I got that started. So that was some murky looking stuff. I might have swore earlier, so I'm just going to restate that. Throw that away. And we'll try and get this coolant out of here. My biggest worry here is that when we go to take these bolts out of the water pump, that we snap one off in the block. So let's cross our fingers that that doesn't happen. Okay, we're still getting coolant out of this, but trying to get a head start on some of the rest of this. This pulley is jammed on. Last night I put fluid film on all of these bolts. It's a product that seems like a miracle product at getting rid of rusty fasteners or being able to get rusty fasteners off. And this pulley was kind of jammed on the flange on the water pump. So I put fluid film around here and in the bolt holes. And then with this pry bar, just very gently start working it off. You don't want to be too aggressive with this or you could damage the pulley. And we've kind of got it loose. So let's see if, there we go. Pulley looks fine. You can really see how bad that water pump deflects. The bearings are completely gone in there. It's just shot. Here's a little tip for when you're working on stuff like this. See this hose clamp here? That's on the lower rad hose. Someone's put that in a way that's almost impossible to get at. When you put this stuff on, put it in a way that you can get at it. Like for instance, put this fastener on the underside. Okay, I've wrapped a plastic bag up around behind the balancer to try and protect that area from coolant overflow. And we're going to try and get this lower rad hose off. If you don't wear glasses, now's the time definitely to wear glasses because this makes a mess. Usually. Okay, so we're going to take these bolts out. There's a couple things that I like to do. First things first, I'm going to lay out a piece of shop towel to lay this stuff out on. So I'm going to lay it out in order. It's a real puzzle, the bolt setup on these Ford water pumps. I fluid filmed all the bolts last night. I've hit them again this morning. Hopefully that's going to make them come out easily. There's a real possibility we break one off in the block, which isn't good. Now, lots of guys will try and take these off with a hand ratchet. My personal opinion is the best way to do it is with an air impact set on a low torque setting. What happens there is you get a modest amount of torque repeatedly against the bolt. Where with a hand ratchet on these little fasteners, you can actually put more torque on than with a low setting air impact. And that's how you end up twisting them off. So We'll do it here. We'll see if they come out. Then you can call me a liar. Try and be careful with these tabs. They're old and brittle. It doesn't take a lot to break them. I see I didn't fluid film that bolt. So let's hit it. You see that stuff bubble? So to get to the water pump, we got to take this air conditioning bracket out of the way. Now I got a set of thin wrenches here, which it's helpful to get in behind here on the stud. So when you work on it, initially we want to take these nuts off. We're going to try and get this front plate off here if we can. Big talk about air impact, but sometimes you just can't get the tool in there. So we're going to hold it at the back and take these nuts off this way. Well, it looks like just a nut is coming. Well, that's happy. You don't have to take it all the way out. Just get it started. So now this plate should come off. Right, we end up with the power steering pump free, but it's still hanging on this stud. Okay. Well, these are the real cross your fingers ones. The ones that could twist off in the block that could cause us a lot of trouble. Look like we got them. Well, that's a relief. We backed off every one of these and none of them broke off. We're going to get the pump off. We're also going to have to take these heater bypass, or the bypass and the heater hose off. So before we're too far along here, now is a good time to get after that. I'm trying to gently work these hoses off. I bought new hoses. I assume I'm going to wreck them. But especially if we're getting into a situation where we think we're going to pull this motor at some point and re-gasket everything and just clean everything up. We're happier if we don't wreck these hoses, and maybe we can reuse them today and put the new hoses on in the final installation. I think that's moving. Okay, that should hang there on those hoses briefly. So sitting there hanging on the hoses. We'll work the hoses off. There's a heater hose off. There's the bypass off. And there's our piece of junk water pump out. There's our Canadian Tire bag out of there too. Who says these are a single use? The car's dirty anyway, but let's not leave coolant all over it if we can avoid it. Okay, there's a new pump beside the old pump. The new pump has comes in a state of partial disassembly. Got some the outlets here have to be threaded in. The back case has to be put together. I'm going to use some Permatex high tack, and we'll go ahead and get this pump ready, and then we'll finish cleaning up the hardware and we can start putting it back together. Now you got to get all of the old gasket material cleaned off of the face of that front cover. I usually use a big hunting knife, and you can use a surfacing disc, although it's not that easy to get in there with a surfacing disc when it's in the motor. This doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be pretty clean. It's cleaned up reasonably good. I'm going to try and get a last touch here with the surfacing disc, if I can get it in here. Okay, it looks pretty clean. Now, it should be no surprise that the really important places to have this cleaned up are around the water passages, the two water passages. And that's where you're going to put some high tack when you put the thing together. The ultrasonic does a pretty good job of getting the parts less greasy, more or less clean, but there's no real substitute for brass wheeling them in order to get them ready to install. So make sure you have your eye protection. When you brass wheel something like this, try to stay out of the fling radius of the brush. It can be shedding bristles in a radius like this. If you stand behind it, you got to wear eye protection, of course, but if you stand behind it, you're not likely to get them in the face. Okay, that part's going to be ready to install. So let me do the rest of these and then we'll get on with the install. All right, I'm going to try and get you guys in here to see this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little high tack just around the ports, around the coolant ports. And I'm going to put a little dab or two up at the top here, just to try and help hold this gasket in place. Okay, we take our new gasket, position it on here, and get all those bolt holes lined up, the 100 bolt holes. This is why we use high tack, because you can move it around a little bit, get this gasket as perfect as it can be. All right, once we're there, I like to put a little high tack around the coolant ports on the water pump side too. And we're going to bring it down in here, and we're going to start by trying to get it started on these hoses. So we got to start on those hoses. I'm holding it away until I've kind of got this squared up. And I'm going to press it up there. And just snug. These two getting started bolts. Okay, then let's put all the other bolts in, and we're going to start by getting one in over here for sure. I did put a little anti-seize on these bolts, so the last guy did. It's not part of the Ford plan, but it probably doesn't hurt. However, because they're anti-seized, I'm going to torque them at a little less than the Ford spec. Well, at the low end of the range on the Ford spec. Let's put it that way. If I was doing this out on the engine stand, I would have chased all these holes with a tap. But that's not necessarily in the cards, doing it in the motor like this. Okay, so those are all in roughly. So now we're going to move on to torquing them. So I'm going to set this to 8 foot-pounds as an initial. That's 8. And I'm going to try and do these in a crossways pattern. So 8's below the torque spec. That's a just snugged. So I'm going to go to the minimum torque spec, which is 12. Remember, I got anti-seize on here. Okay. So the spec is 12 to 18. I'm going to go 14 with the anti-seize. Okay, then I'm going to go a second time around at 14. I'm getting a little bit. A little bit. That's twice around at 14. I think I'm going to go once more at 14. Okay, let's call that done. We'll try and get these hose clamps in a position where we can deal with them properly. We'll get our plate. Slip that over. Get everything started before you start tightening it down. Okay, that's everything snugged down. Let's go ahead and check our torque specs and then finish it up. You can see our handiwork up in there. New water pump, new balancer, hooked the lower rad hose up. I'm going to put this pulley back on. No genius stuff to that. Then I'm going to drop the shroud and fan in from the top. Bolt the fan up to here, up to this flange. Then we can put the belt back on, put coolant in it, start driving it. I'll drop this in together. There are tabs down there that the shroud engages with. There's no super awesome trick to this. We're all but done. I will say you should be able to put this water pump part back in service right away. But if you don't have to, it's not a bad plan to leave it overnight before you put coolant in there, just to give that high tack the best chance to assist with the seal. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get all this ready, even put the belt on, but I'm not going to put the coolant in until tomorrow. And then we'll fire it up and see how we did. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell so that you won't miss out on future videos.